All right, everybody, I'm ready to get started. Welcome back. Welcome to the, I don't know, it's like the 13th week of class or something. We have a few weeks left. I think it might be the 12th, 12th or 13th. We have a few weeks left. We just finished our first exam. You saw the results already. So we're going to move forward today. Most important reminder is that we are not meeting next Tuesday. There's no class next Tuesday. I'll email you, of course, on either Sunday or Monday and remind you of that. And that's it. I'll remind you in the email tonight as well. All right, so yeah, I graded the exams. You guys saw your scores. The average was good. 60.81 is not a bad average. There's a group of people in this class that are working. They're working hard, and it's showing, and it's a good thing, and I'm happy to see it. So, a decent amount wound up in the A and B category, as is generally the case. But, of course, a good chunk of folks wound up in the middle there, and then definitely there are people at the very bottom. If you're winding up in the very bottom at this point, you are in dangerous territory. It's very possible that you will not be passing this course and you will need to retake the course. So that's just something to keep in mind. I've been trying to emphasize to you how important it is for you to be dedicated to this class on a regular basis rather than just like right before an exam, I'm going to study the practice exam to see what I can do. That's not going to do it. You have to learn the material, and then you go to an exam, and the exam is a random selection of the things that I cover, and you'll know about a lot of it, and you'll get a good grade if you've been learning stuff. And if you haven't been, then you need to accept the consequences of your actions. At this point, it's up in the air if you've wound up in these two categories for the first two exams, whether or not you'll be able to get out of that category. You have to have a strong finish in the final, and of course get the paper in on time and whatnot. But the paper itself will not save you. If you do not pass the final, you will not pass the class. So just keep that in mind, folks. It's a curve course, and I know that people tend to just depend on that, and that's what happens when you depend on it. You wind up potentially in these categories. So if you did, again, you're in dangerous territory. If you wound up in the middle, you made it. You made it through. Congratulations. It's all right as far as this class goes, but as I've emphasized before, there are no curves in life. So if you are not always trying to be the absolute best at everything that you're doing, then you are missing a very important opportunity and a really important component of what we do here, which is to try to get you guys to grow as individuals, as workers, as innovators, people that can just think past their own boundaries, grow past their own limitations. That is a lot of what goes on here. And if you are just kind of trying to slide by as maybe you did in high school, where you were forced to do everything, forced to be in school, forced to, eat in the lunch area, whatever, all these silly things where it's like a prison and you basically have to kind of respond to that. If you've carried that mentality into this place, kind of thinking, well, it's just the same thing and I'm just going to do what I did there and I'm not going to actually care about anything that I do, then none of this is going to mean anything when you get out of here. It's all going to be meaningless. You're going to get out there and you're going to say, hey, look, I got a degree. And everyone's going to be like, great, come on in, come work for me. And then nothing. You've got nothing to offer. You're willing to drop the ball. You're not willing to spend long hours on trying to figure things out and getting complicated tasks done that require a lot of investment of time and dedication. You just don't have that, and you won't have that, and then things won't work out for you out there. And the good opportunities, as I mentioned before, the ones people want, those opportunities require those kind of people that are just go-getters. I'm here. What do you need me to do? I'm ready to go. I'm ready to just get these things done that I have to get in the best quality possible. Just trying to do the best job I possibly can. And again, that's what you should be trying to accomplish here in order to be able to carry that through into the world, where it has to be automatic there. It's not oh, you have time to learn to be that person. No, you don't. You don't have time to learn to be that person. You're not that person. Next. There's an infinite line of people waiting to have the opportunities that are good in this world. And if you are not creating the value in yourself here, then you are not creating anything here. And again, it's going to be meaningless for you. So work harder to be better. Like it's so important, and you don't realize it. But this is really important. What goes on here, and again, there's that, and there's the other part of it, which is like the money part. You're paying to be here, so you're paying to be in classes, and then you're doing nothing in your classes, and then you're just like getting bad grades in your classes, like, or mediocre grades in your classes. Like, you're paying for crap, like, versus like I'm paying for something great and I highly value it, and then it actually holds that value, versus like I'm paying for something great and then I'm flushing it down the toilet, and then I'm going to the sewer and I'm grabbing it, I'm flushing it down the toilet once again each midterm, and then the final again, flushing it down the toilet. It's like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing? I don't know what you're doing. I don't think you do. I don't think you do either. And I hope at some point you turn it around and you figure it out, because again, like, you'll check off the list of classes you need to take and like get your C's, and then it won't mean a thing. It won't mean a thing. And then you'll be like that guy that came on campus last year with a mallet, like trying to knock over the Matador statue because he was pissed off because he got out of here and his degree was worthless. I mean, obviously that's the worst case scenario, and obviously that guy needs some psychological help. I'm not saying that most of you do. I'm sure everybody's sane in this class. I hope you are. I know you're sane. But like, it's true. Like, these things are real. This is not a joke. Like, this is not like I'm gonna get away with something. Like, this is not that time anymore. Like, it was that time before in high school. Yeah, that's fun. You're getting away with stuff, and you're getting around the crazy teachers and principals and all these stuff. Like, that's great. Great, you did it. All right, but that here, you're not getting away with anything, and you just can't get away with anything in the world beyond college. Like, it's like you have to be present, you have to be ready to give it all, and you have to have something to give, versus just like, I'm here, what do I do today? And everyone's like, I don't want this person here, get them out of here. Like, seriously, that's how it works. Like, the world is cutthroat, and like I've mentioned before, it's like people are really just so ready to say, I don't care about you, because there's so many people to care about. It's like, if you're not demonstrating value, then then you're not worth anything, really, ultimately. Worst case scenario, like, you see that guy, that poor guy being dragged off the plane on Delta, that Chinese doctor who's an American, who's a Chinese man, who's a doctor, like, he's getting dragged out. Like, nobody cared about the fact that he was a doctor, like, that he was just a person on the plane. Like, obviously that's not going to happen to most people, but that just demonstrates like the degree of apathy that we can encounter in this world. And if you don't combat that by just bringing it, then you can easily fall into that category of like being bad person, metaphorically being dragged out of every situation that's worth anything. And it will happen to you. It will happen to you, and you will not like it, and it will persist, and it will get worse as you get older. Because as you get older, you lose the youth, and you lose the value that carries, and so people care about you even less than they cared about you before. So it's true. It's just reality. It's just reality of the world we live in. It's an unfortunate, we'd all love to live in this perfect world where everybody cares about each other, and you're just given as many opportunities as you need to really grow. No, that's not the world we live in. That's just not the world we live in. And you have to be real about it, and this is a very great opportunity for you to grow, become better, change, and you should take it. But again, like, some of you are just going to barely make it through this course, and you know what? That's fine. Again, that's fine. You are going to make it. I'm not going to fail the majority of people. That's absurd. I would never do that. But there are professors that will do that, so be careful. But again, I'm not going to do that. But like, this is not acceptable overall, and really ultimately, into that the extent that it is not acceptable, and the extent to which that has any importance should be to you. Like, it shouldn't be to me, it shouldn't be to your peers, it shouldn't be to anybody, it should be to you. Like, I'm not happy with what I've done, I can do better, and that should fuel you to be better, and that is all that should be happening here, and it should constantly be happening, constantly. And in the end, you should all be, of course, commended for just being in college, because you are choosing to be here, and that's a good thing. So just that itself is worth a lot, and it says a lot about you, and that's why I do ultimately have a lot of respect for every single person in my class, in all my classes in this entire school. Like, it's really easy to just say forget this and walk away from it. So you're definitely you're in a good category because of that. But like, again, like, the world doesn't care about that, and if you're not doing what this place is intended to do for you, then again, you're just kind of, you're taking the wrong roads here, folks. You're taking the wrong roads. But I want things to work out for you, and I hope it does, and I hope you turn it around. And it's all right. Like, at least you got to see. It's fine. If you got a B or an A, good job, folks. I'm really proud of you. I'm really proud of you working as hard as you did, being in the class. I appreciate it. Keep up the good work. You'll get a good grade in this class. But again, I don't give out A's. I don't give out B's. So you have to earn those grades. So I don't want anybody coming to me at the end like, oh, well, you should give me this. It's like, no, if you didn't earn it, I'm not going to give it to you. I'll pass you, because I'll pass like a good chunk of the class. But I won't give out good grades. Like, those grades are super valuable because they send a very clear signal that you are of that quality. You are putting in the work. Like, you are worth, other opportunities that might be based on these grades that you're getting here. So I'm not going to send that false signal to people. Like, I think that is unethical to do that. So I wouldn't do that. So again, if you want the good grades in this class, you have to earn them. A lot of you are already on track to do so, and you will get your good grade, and that's it. You deserve it, and good job to you. And you're already where you need to be, and you just need to continue doing that. And the world is your oyster. It is like, just get out there. Like, once you get out there, once you have your degree, like, doors will open for you, and you will demonstrate to them what you have demonstrated to me, and things will work out for you. Things will work out for you. So, good job, folks. And again, it doesn't mean that people here are not worth anything. You're worth a lot in terms of like, just like the fact that you're here, and like you're willing to take important steps to try to improve. But like, you're not taking enough steps, and in part, I think it's just like you haven't quite figured it out. Like, you haven't quite figured out what it takes to kind of operate at the higher level. The amount of dedication and time it takes outside of class to do well in classes like this, that again do reflect the amount of responsibilities that you will face in, like, the good opportunities out there. The good opportunities require you to dedicate yourself to like spending hours on end, like figuring things out, maybe giving up your weekends, maybe giving up your nights, or whatever, like, that's what those situations take. And so if you are working at the right level here, then you'll be used to it, and it won't be a shock to you, and it won't be an adjustment, and it'll be an asset. You'll be an asset to the people that will ultimately give you opportunities. So so work harder, folks. All right, so that's exam 2. So we've turned that final corner in the course, even though we've already started covering the material for the last part of the course. So that's a good thing. We've got that. We've got some of the material already kind of under us. And I think we're going to meet 3 more times after this. And then that'll finish off the course. So today we're going to finish chapter 9 that we've been covering, and then we're going to start on chapter 10. And then the next time we meet in 2 weeks, we'll finish off chapter 10, and then after that we'll do chapter 11 and then chapter 12. And then at some point in there, I think the last week is when the papers due. So there's that coming up as well, so just keep that in mind. And that's basically it, folks. That's the roadmap from now till the end. And again, like, if you're kind of in the middle, it's not the end of the world. You can still kind of rise up. Just do really well on the final. I don't curve the final itself. I take your score out of 100. I multiply that by the 20 that it's worth, and then I add that to your overall score, and then I curve the class based on your final score of points that you've earned in the class. So So I'll have final brackets like you saw for both exams, and that will again reflect how many points you've earned relative to everybody else in the class. So that's how the final grading goes down. That's why you can't really like say, oh, what do I need on the final to do well in the class? Well, I can't tell you exactly because A, it's curved and you never know how other people are going to do. But also like it's not your final itself that's going to be curved. It's going to be the final grade. So it just creates an extra sort of layer of uncertainty with respect to what your final grade will be computed as. So all you can do is really do well. And because the final exam itself is not curved, it's a good opportunity for those of you that aren't doing too great to like have a really strong showing, because if you wind up getting like an actual like a 90 or something, an 80 or 90, and that's going to add a lot of points to your overall points that other people won't get because they won't get that extra curve bump. And so you may make up some lost ground there. So that's a possibility as well. Just something to keep in mind. All right, so before I get into the actual material, does anybody have any questions or anything you'd like me to address? I think there was a question here earlier. No? Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna pass it out at the end of the class, at the very end today. Yeah. Other questions? So remember, I'm not just talking to you, few in the class. I was talking to the entire class. So don't feel bad. It's, if you wound up in some of these other categories or whatever. Like I wasn't talking directly to you. I was talking to everybody. As you see, there's a lot of people not here, so everybody needs to hear this. So I'm talking to everybody. I know that a decent amount of you that I see on a regular basis did do well in the exam, and so you know who you are, and I don't need to say anything to you. Like you know what you're doing. All right. So we've moved on to now studying optimal decision making by firms in the more complicated market settings that firms can operate in, which is the oligopoly setting, in which there are a few large firms dominating the market, and there's a couple of dimensions of complication that these firms face that firms in other markets don't. One is that there's interdependence in decision making. So firms can't just base their decisions of how much they're going to supply and how much they're going to charge based on their own conditions in relation to demand. They also have to consider what their rivals are doing. Like, what are my rivals doing in response to what I'm doing? Because what my rival's doing is going to move me down the demand curve that we all share. And so if my rival expands output and we move down along the demand curve, that's going to lower the price. And if you don't lower your price, then nobody's going to buy from you because your rival is going to be charging a lower price and they're going to earn higher profits than you. And you may get priced out of the market. So you have to constantly be thinking about what your rivals are doing when there's only a few firms operating in a market like this. So that is the first layer of complexity. The second layer of complexity is that the firms have an incentive to work together. They can work together as a monopolist and to earn the kind of profits that monopolists can earn in a market. But in this country and in most countries, it's illegal to do that. Firms cannot get together and say, hey, we're going to rig the market. We're going to together charge this high price and together decide we're only going to supply this amount. That's something that you'll see is legal in some international contexts where there isn't like specific domestic law that applies to businesses like the OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, the Middle East countries that supply a lot of the oil. They basically do get together and decide, hey, we're only going to supply this much oil so that we can charge a higher price. Like they actually do the things that are illegal to do. In most countries, they're able to do it because nobody's regulating them. And so when firms do that, it's called a cartel. So it's called a cartel. So that's the actual formal name for it. So they do have a cartel over oil production. And for them, like, within the context that they operate, it's legal. within illegal context, firms obviously still want to do that because they can earn more profits by doing it. But the problem is that they can't enforce the agreements if they do somehow wind up coming to an agreement. And so they might set up an agreement, not be able to enforce the agreement, and then there's an incentive for the firms to cheat on those agreements by so they'll agree, oh, we'll limit the amount of output in the market, but then one firm could cheat on that agreement, expand output, and then wind up earning the majority of the profits in the market. So there's incentive for the firms to work together, and then there's incentive for the firms to cheat on each other's illegal agreements, essentially, that cannot be legally enforced. So again, that's the other dimension of complexity that these firms face. And so it's a complicated setting, this oligopoly setting, and that's why we again have several different modeling approaches to kind of try to maneuver these this setting to try to get the best sort of insights into how to best operate within them. And so in this chapter, we're covering 4 different models that focus on 4 different possible scenarios that oligopolists might find themselves in. And then in the next chapter, we use what's called game theory to sort of study the same kind of situation and kind of look at the situation of each firm making their decisions as part of a game where the payoffs, their profits are like the things like they win essentially, and they could lose, and the choices they make are their strategy. So we'll start setting up the framework for that today after the break. So as far as Chapter 9 goes, we're going to finish the Stackelberg oligopoly, which was the model we started on last time. And then we'll talk about the Bertrand oligopoly, which is the final model in this chapter. And then we'll just do a comparison of the 4 oligopoly models. And then we'll quickly touch upon this subject called contestable markets, in which there might be one firm operating in a market, and given certain conditions, the others might or might not want to enter the market and compete against the existing firm and take away some of that market power. But we'll talk about what makes a market contestable versus not. And then that'll close off the chapter, and then we'll start Chapter 10, game theory. And we'll just do an overview of how games are structured and how it relates to strategic thinking. And then we'll start talking about the first application, which is the simultaneous move one-shot game, in which the players make their decisions at the same time, and then they play the game only once, versus maybe making decisions at different times, like one after the other sequentially, or maybe having a game where they each make their move at the same time, but it's played several times, and that changes the outcome. Don't worry, right now it's very general. We'll talk about how all these things affect the outcome and why it's important when we get to it, of course. And as far as Chapter 8 goes, Chapter 9 goes, we'll finish today. I'll open up the homework. I'll open up the mini paper, and I'll make the mini paper due right before the next class, which is in 2 weeks. So then you'll have 2 weeks to write that paper. And hopefully you've already knocked out most of the papers and you're basically done with that, so it's not even a problem. Hopefully. All right. So previously, again, we just generally started talking about oligopoly. Oligopoly refers to a situation where there's relatively few large firms in an industry. 2 to 10 is usually the number. The more firms there are, obviously, the more competitive the situation gets. We looked at the first model, which was the Sweezy oligopoly model, in which there are a few firms in the market serving many consumers. Oligopoly, the firms produce differentiated products. They produce slightly different versions of the same thing. Each firm believes that rivals are going to cut prices in response to a price decrease, but will not raise their prices in response to a price increase. So demand is going to be more elastic when prices are increased than when prices are decreased. That means that the demand curve is going to be kinked like this, and it's going to have this weird marginal revenue curve, which I already talked about couple of times why it looks like this. If you don't understand why it looks like this, go back to the first lecture where I talked about this. It's all animated and explains exactly how we get to this marginal revenue. Basically, in a Sweezy model, because the firms have these beliefs about what their rivals are going to do with respect to price decreases and price increases, and they have this type of kind of kink demand as a result of it, and therefore this weird kind of marginal revenue. It means that if costs drop for these firms, there's going to be a range over which they are not going to need to change their output level. And that's only specific to the Sweezy oligopoly setting, and it has everything to do with that assumption being made about what rivals are going to do. So it's based on the beliefs of what your rivals are going to do. Normally, most firms that have market power set their marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. If marginal cost drops below marginal revenue, they supply more, they increase the amount. But again, for a Sweezy oligopoly, there's going to be a range over which they should not do that in order to maintain their profits. And so that's the insight we gain from the model. And then the one thing about the model that is sort of always called into question is like, what is this price? How do firms identify this price where the demand curve like kind of switches from being elastic to inelastic? Well, that's something that firm managers need to sort of figure out through experience. That's the response to that. All right, then we talked about the second oligopoly model, which is the Cournot oligopoly, in which there are few firms in the market serving many consumers. Each firm produces either the same exact thing or different versions of what could be sold. So a homogeneous, same or differentiated product. Each firm believes that rivals will hold their output constant if it changes its output. So that's the main thing that sort of defines this setting. The setting that this applies to is an oligopoly setting where the firms are making output decisions. So they're making output decisions, how much they're going to supply of a good. The best market to think of is like the oil market, the raw oil market, the suppliers that pump oil out of the ground. There's only so much oil to pump out. There's only so much demand for oil. So each one has to kind of make a decision. How much oil am I going to supply at any given time? And we assume that these firms are making that decision at the same time. So they're all choosing how much they're going to supply at the same exact time. So they don't know what their rivals are going to do. So all they can do is say, well, the amount my rival is going to produce is constant. It's something that I cannot affect, and and they're not going to respond to what I'm doing. And so each firm takes their rival's output as constant. So that's the main sort of belief about rivals that characterizes the Cournot oligopoly setting. And of course, there's barriers to entry. Something's keeping firms out of the market, which is what is creating the conditions for a few firms to dominate the market. All right, so we figured out that for the firms to figure out what best to do, they come up with what are called reaction functions, which allow them to set a quantity as a function of their opponent's quantity in order for them to have a rule that will allow them to constantly maximize their profits in response to what their rivals choose to supply. And so in a Cournot duopoly setting where there's only two firms, each one will have a reaction function. So here's firm one's reaction function, here's firm two's reaction function. Where they meet in the middle is a Cournot equilibrium. These are the outputs that they're both going to choose. And we could solve for those mathematically by looking at a market. Again, we're assuming that there are only two firms in this market, Cournot duopolies. This is the inverse demand function they face. There's two firms. They're both choosing output. So we separate the quantity in the market into the two quantity variables that the two firms can control. And then what you have to do is you have to take the perspective of a firm on the market, assume that your rival's output is constant. So taking the perspective of firm 1, you assume firm 2's output is constant. So 10 minus Q2 becomes your constant. And then you're just left with minus Q1 as sort of your residual demand. So this is the perspective on demand that you have. And now you just want to maximize your profits by setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So now you just turn this into marginal revenue by, again, doubling the slope in absolute value. Has no effect on the constant, which still has the control variable of your rival in it. And then you have to set that equal to marginal cost, which we assumed are 0 in these in these problems. So marginal revenue equals marginal cost here. And then you solve for your output, Q1, as a function of firm 2's output from that relationship. And that gets you to what's called the reaction function, which is those curves that we just saw graphed a second ago. And because both firms have the same marginal cost, both firms have the same reaction functions. If they had different marginal costs, then they would set the same marginal revenue equal to different marginal costs, which would result in different reaction functions. And therefore, the Cournot equilibrium outputs, the points where the two curves crossed in the graph, that is the state of rest for this Cournot oligopoly setting, where the two firms are doing the best they possibly can, are going to be symmetric. So Q1 will supply 10/3. Q2 will also supply 10/3 because they have the same reaction functions. And then to figure out price, we plug in both of their quantities into our inverse demand function. That gets us to the price that they should both charge in the market in order for both of them to maximize their profits. And then I'm not going to go through this because I went through it last week, but this basically highlighted the fact that the firms have an incentive to cheat, to create collusive agreements that are legal, that will help them to make higher profits. But because the agreements are illegal and they cannot enforce the agreements, that there is an incentive for them to cheat, which means that they can make higher profits. Go to the last lecture to make sure you understand what all of this gobbledygook is. All right, then we moved on to the Stackelberg oligopoly. The Stackelberg oligopoly is similar to the Cournot oligopoly with one difference. The only difference is that one firm gets to make their supply decision first. So in a Cournot setting, both firms decide how much they're going to supply at the same time. In a Stackelberg oligopoly, there is a leader, someone that gets to decide, I'm going to supply this amount of oil, and then everybody else in the market has to respond to that. They have to react to that. And so there is sort of a sequential series of actions that take place that result in a different market outcome than you would see in a Cournot setting. So in a Stackelberg oligopoly, all right, so that's right. I decided I wanted to go through the demonstration problem again to show you how to solve for the Stackelberg stuff. So we'll do that in a second. But anyway, in a Stackelberg oligopoly, what happens is the leader gets to make their output decision first, but they are all, remember, it's interdependence. It's an oligopoly. So they still have to take into consideration that their rivals are going to respond to what they choose, and that's going to move them along the demand curve. And so they need to take that into consideration when they are choosing how much they're going to supply initially. So what they do is they know that the followers, the other firms, are going to react as Cournot oligopolists. The reaction functions for the followers are solved for the same way as the Cournot reaction functions we solve for in the regular Cournot setting. And so the Stackelberg leader needs to incorporate firm 2's reaction function into its perspective on demand, then solve for its optimal quantity setting, marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. So that's how the leader decides its output. Then the followers respond to that via the Cournot reaction function. So let's go through that via the math. So suppose the inverse demand function for two firms in a homogeneous product Stackelberg oligopoly is given by P equals 50 minus Q1 plus Q2. So again, we have two firms. Q1 is output for the leader. Q2 is output for the follower. And the cost functions of the two firms are as follows. We keep it simple. There's no fixed cost. There's just variable cost. And so marginal cost, of course, being just the derivative, is equal to 2 for each firm. So firm 1 is the leader, firm 2 is the follower. So we're going to solve for firm 2's reaction function first, as we would for any Cournot reaction function. Then we're going to solve for firm 1's output. Then we're going to solve for firm 2's output in response to firm 1's output. And then we're going to solve for the market price. All right, so firm 2's reaction function. So remember, we need to solve for firm 2's reaction function because firm 1 needs to incorporate its rival's reaction function, the follower's reaction function, into its perspective on the market. So that's what we need to do first. So firm 2's reaction function, well, again, it's like we did in the Cournot setting. We just have to take the perspective of a firm on the market, derive their marginal revenue, set equal to the marginal cost, and then solve for their output as a function of their rival's output. So taking firm 2's perspective on the market, they're going to take firm 1's output as constant. So their constant is going to be 50 minus Q1. And then the residual demand is going to be minus Q2. So to get the marginal revenue, you double that. So then we get 50 minus Q1 in the constant minus 2Q2 is the marginal revenue for the second firm. That is the follower. They set their marginal revenue equal to their marginal cost, which is equal to 2. And now we want to solve for firm 2's output as a function of firm 1's output, doing a little bit of algebra. Subtract this from both sides, and then divide both sides by -2, and that's going to get us to firm 2's Cournot reaction function, which again tells it how it should optimally choose how much, let's say oil, how much oil to supply in response to how much the leader supplies. So that's firm 2's reaction function. So that's the first part of the question. The second part is, what is firm 1's output? So now firm 1 needs to decide how much output it's going to supply. Again, it is the leader. It gets to choose first. But it knows that firm 2 is going to react in this Cournot fashion. So it needs to incorporate that into its decision. So this is the inverse demand function. In order to incorporate what firm 2 is going to do in response to it, it needs to plug in for Q2 what firm 2 is going to do to set Q2. And so plugging in Q2 equals 24 minus 1/2 Q1 for Q2 in the inverse demand function gets us this expression here. And then we can just simplify this. So you have 50 minus 24, that's 26, minus Q1 plus 0.5 Q1, leaving us with minus 0.5 Q1. So you've got P equals 26 minus 0.5 Q1. So this is, again, this is the perspective on the demand of firm 1, knowing that firm 2 is going to react to it in a Cournot fashion. Like it's incorporated that into its perspective on demand. So now it can solve for its optimal quantity, being the leader, choosing how much it's going to supply, knowing what its rival is going to do, and then of course its rival will do what it expects it to do, and then everybody will maximize their profits. So marginal revenue equals 26 minus, of course, Q1. You just double that there, and then set that equal to firm 1's marginal cost, which is equal to 2. And so now we can solve for firm 1's output, which is 24 units. So the leader, the Stackelberg leader, will supply 24 units. That will be the first move made in the market. They will make their decision first. All right, firm 2 now has to decide how much it's going to supply. Well, it's going to supply 24. It's going to supply whatever the 24 will dictate it should supply based on its best response that the reaction function tells it to do. So plugging in 24 into firm 2's reaction function, doing a little bit of algebra there, you got 24 minus 12. That gets you to 12 units. So firm 2 will supply 12 units. And then, of course, the market price, plugging in the quantities, 24 and 12, into the inverse demand function, gets us to the market price, what everybody's going to charge. In this case, it's $14. So it's a little bit more complicated than the Cournot, but the Cournot itself is kind of complicated relative to what we've done so far. So it's definitely a building up process of understanding. So you can't just kind of jump in and like study the Stackelberg without understanding the Cournot. You can't understand the Cournot without understanding like monopoly and everything we did prior. So I hope that you've been learning some stuff so that you know, have a relatively easy time kind of digesting this new stuff so that, you know, you do well the last part of the course, folks. All right, so in general, in a Stackelberg setting, like in a Cournot setting, price will exceed marginal cost. So the firms do have some market power. You're going to have some deadweight loss. You're going to have, again, some inefficiency in the market because of the market power. And again, that is something that the firms do to maximize their profits, but they would want to do more. They would want to behave like monopolists, but they can't. So yeah, this translates into deadweight loss, but the deadweight loss is lower than that arising under a pure monopoly. All right, finally, let's look at the Bertrand oligopoly setting. So an industry is characterized as a Bertrand oligopoly if there are a few firms in the market serving many consumers. The firms produce the same stuff. Everybody produces identical products at a constant marginal cost. Firms engage in price competition and react optimally to price changes by competitors. So unlike Cournot and Stackelberg, where the firms are competing on quantities, once again in Bertrand, like in Sweezy, they are competing on prices. Consumers have perfect information and there are no transaction costs, so all consumers understand how all firms are operating. They understand the quality of everything being sold. So there's no ambiguity with respect to consumers and what they're doing. Like they know that they're in a marketplace where there's several options for them of the thing that they want to buy. But of course, barriers to entry do exist because it is an oligopoly setting. All right, so from the viewpoint of the manager, a Bertrand oligopoly is undesirable because a Bertrand oligopoly will lead to zero economic profits. You will have the same outcome as you do in perfect competition, even if there are only two firms in the market. So from the viewpoint of consumers, Bertrand oligopoly is desirable because it leads to the same outcome as a perfectly competitive market. Consumers get to pay a price that's equal to marginal cost. There's no inefficiency, no deadweight loss. The markets are as efficient as possible, which is the outcome that we get in perfect competition, which again is on the best end of the competitive spectrum that a firm can operate in, the worst end being the monopoly context. So because consumers have perfect information and there's zero transaction costs, and because the products are identical, all consumers will purchase from the firm that's charging the lowest price. So suppose firm one charges the monopoly price. So firm one's like, I'm going to try to make as much money as possible and charge the monopoly price. Well, firm two can slightly undercut firm one, and by doing so, they would capture the entire market and make positive profits while firm one would sell nothing. Firm one would then retaliate and undercut firm two's lower price, thus recapturing the entire market. So essentially they wind up in a price war and they wind up undercutting each other to the point where ultimately they lower the price as low as possible, which is their marginal cost. They can't price below their marginal cost because that means that the extra revenue they gain from selling would be less than their costs, and it wouldn't be worth it for them to continue selling. And so the price war in a Bertrand oligopoly leads to the firms charging prices that are equal to the marginal cost, essentially getting us to the point of the perfectly competitive market outcome, where again there are zero economic profits being made. So Bertrand oligopoly and homogeneous products lead to a situation where each firm charges marginal costs and economic profits are zero. So the Bertrand setting is the easiest one to understand here because again, you do easily just wind up in that perfectly competitive market outcome, and so it's not very complicated to understand. It's a price war, undercut to the point where price equals marginal cost. But we can figure out how to get out of the Bertrand trap, where the firms have to do that using game theory. So that's something we'll study in the next chapter. All right, so let's compare the oligopoly models. So suppose inverse demand function is given by, let's say, 1,000 minus Q1, Q2. And the cost function for each firm is identical and given by, let's say, 4QI. So each firm, I, indexed by I, has the same costs. And so their marginal cost is equal to 4 to the derivative of their total cost function. So let's look at the outcome under Cournot. The profit function for the individual Cournot firm is, of course, equal to price times quantity minus their costs. Price in this case has been, we've just included the inverse demand function for price there. The reaction functions for the Kuno oligopolis are 498 minus 1 half Q2. I don't solve for them here. You can solve for them yourself if you're interested. So these are their reaction functions. So solving the two reaction functions for the Kuno equilibrium outputs is going to yield 332 units of output that each firm will supply. That's the Kuno equilibrium outputs. Again, it's the point of intersection of the two reaction functions. So total output in the market will be 664, which in this case, if we plug that into the inverse demand function, will get us to a price of $336. And plugging those values into the profit function reveals the firm earns profits of, in this case, roughly $110,224. So each firm makes that kind of profit in this Kuno setting. So here's our output, price, profit per firm. All right, let's look at Stackelberg in the same kind of situation, but again, the Stackelberg leader gets to decide first how much they're going to supply. So with these demand and cost functions, the output of the Stackelberg leader is going to wind up being 498. So we know that each firm in the Kuno setting supplied 332, so we can initially see that just having that first mover advantage allows you to supply a lot more than your competitors. That means you're going to earn more profits. The follower, of course, takes that level of output as given and produces according to its reaction function, which is the same as the Kuno reaction function. So plugging that in gets us to firm 2's output to be 249. So the Kuno follower in the Stackelberg oligopoly setting will produce less than a normal Kuno firm in a Kuno oligopoly setting. But overall, the combined quantities will be greater than in a Kuno setting. So you get a better outcome for the market when you get that first mover advantage for one of the firms. The price, if we plugged in these quantities into our inverse demand function, winds up being $253, which is less than the Kuno price. So again, market power is eroded overall in the market. Because more is being supplied, they have to charge a lower price. So you get a better outcome as far as prices, just again by the fact that the Stackelberg leader gets to go first. As far as profits go, the leader in this case makes 124,000 and the follower makes 62,000. So the Stackelberg leader winds up making more profit than the Kuno individual firms in the Kuno setting, where again each firm makes their output decision at the same time. But the Stackelberg follower that behaves like a Kuno oligopolist makes less profit than they would if they were in a normal Kuno setting. All right, so the leader does better in the Stackelberg oligopoly than in a Kuno oligopoly due to its first mover advantage. The follower earns lower profits in a Stackelberg oligopoly. All right, Bertrand's going to get us, the perfectly competitive market outcome, which is going to be the most efficient market outcome. So recall that firms engage in Bertrand competition, end up setting price equal to marginal cost. Therefore, price equals marginal cost, $4, and profits are 0 for each firm. So the price is $4. So that's obviously significantly less than we see in these oligopoly settings. And obviously, the firms make 0 economic profit, which means that they're again making their opportunity cost, but that's it. They're just making the foregone interest they could have earned if they used their productive capital to invest in some basic return instrument like a bond or something. And total market output is significantly higher too. We get a 996 output. So this is the most efficient market outcome you'll get because it's a perfectly competitive market outcome, which is what the Bertrand leads to. So this is the best the market can do. So again, there are no mutually beneficial transactions that don't happen in the market. Everybody that can buy something does. Everybody that can sell something does under the market price. So a lot more people get to buy things than in the oligopoly setting at a much lower price. And given symmetric firms, each firm basically being relatively the same size, each firm gets about half the market. And then finally, let's look at the collusive outcome. So the collusive outcome is the outcome where the firms are somehow able to get behind closed doors, form illegal agreements to work together like a monopolist and get away with it. And neither firm cheats on the other and like tries to supply more in order to get higher profits. So if they do that, then they essentially behave like a monopolist. So the collusive outcome is the monopoly outcome. So it's basically the result you would get by just looking at this market as a monopoly. So when firms collude, total industry output is the monopoly level based on the market inverse demand. Since the market inverse demand is equal to 1,000 minus Q, marginal revenue is equal to 1,000 minus 2Q. The marginal revenue function assumes the firms act as a single profit maximizing firm, which is what collusion is all about. Setting marginal revenue equal to marginal cost, which is $4, yields, of course, this expression, which gets us to a monopoly output to be $4.98, the lowest amount in any sort of market setting. So again, when the firms work together as a monopolist, you get the most inefficient result. You get a lot of deadweight loss. You get a lot of mutually beneficial transactions that don't occur, the difference between the Bertrand outcome and the collusive outcome. And even worse outcomes that in the Cournot and Stackelberg setting. So again, the worst outcome you get for a market when a firm has monopoly power and when firms are able to work together as a monopolist. And of course, the price is going to be the highest. So you're going to get $502 versus $4 under Bertrand, and even half of that in Stackelberg, and roughly 2/3 of it in Cournot. And the firms are going to make, and the firm makes a profit of $124,000. Just based on the way it wound up making the same as the Stackelberg leader, but generally it will make more. But nonetheless, that demonstrates that the Stackelberg leader benefits quite a bit from the market as far as profits go, like in a very good way. But the fact that there is a Stackelberg leader gets the market to a much better outcome than a monopoly situation. And so there's actually more profits being made here than in a monopoly situation. And consumers are better off as well. So you can see there's a lot of variation in the outcome in the market, and it all depends on basically the dimension that these firms are competing on, which in these cases is quantity, and in this case it's price, and also what assumptions are being made about their rivals. Here, you're assuming that the rival's output is going to be constant. Here, we assume that there's a leader, and that they are going to take into consideration the fact that the followers are going to respond in the same way that Cournot oligopolists behave. So if you become a manager in an oligopolistic market, it's important to recognize that your optimal decisions and profits will vary depending on the type of oligopolistic interaction. All right, finally, let's look at contestable markets. So thus far, we've emphasized strategic interaction amongst existing firms in an oligopoly. Strategic interaction can also exist between firms that are in the market and potential entrants that are trying to get into the market, leading to a Bertrand-like outcome. So a contestable market is a market in which a single firm exists, but there's another firm, a potential entrant, that is free to enter the market whenever it chooses. So there aren't any barriers to entry in this type of situation. A market is contestable if all producers have access to the same technology. Consumers respond quickly to price changes. Existing firms cannot respond quickly to entry by lowering price. So firms that are in the market cannot quickly lower their prices in order to undercut these new rivals that are entering the market. And a market is contestable if there's no sunk costs, meaning that there are no costs that cannot be recuperated by firms that want to enter the market. So if these four conditions hold, then incumbent firms that exist in the market, have no market power over consumers, because they're constantly being held by the threat of other firms entering the market if they even try to charge anything other than their marginal cost. So the equilibrium price corresponds to marginal cost, and firms earn zero economic profits when a market is contestable. So the reason for the result is as follows. If existing firms charge a price in excess of what they require to recover their costs, so if a firm tries to charge a price above their marginal cost, a new firm could immediately enter the market with the same technology and charge a price slightly below existing firms' prices. Since the incumbents, the existing firms, cannot quickly respond by lowering their prices, then the entrant, the new firm that comes in, would get all the incumbents' customers by charging the lower price. Incumbents are disciplined by the threat of entry by new firms. So an important condition for a contestable market is the absence of sunk costs. Suppose an incumbent firm, a firm that's already in the market, is charging a high price, which is what is luring another firm in. They know that they could charge a lower price and earn profit. So the new entrant calculates that it could earn $70,000 by entering the market and charging a lower price than the existing firm. Suppose that to enter the market, though, the entrant needs to pay a sunk cost of $20,000. So they have to spend money on something that if they wind up not operating in the market and somehow the other firm is able to lower their price, then they'll lose that $20,000. Like they cannot recuperate it. So the incumbents cannot lower their price quickly. Again, the incumbents being the firms that already exist in the market. They cannot lower their prices quickly, so the entrant may earn some profit early on, but not enough profit to offset the sunk costs before the incumbents lower their prices. And so that's essentially why sunk costs are important. So again, these are the conditions necessary for a contestable market to exist. It's a rare thing, but again, it is another sort of dimension that could improve the efficiency of markets via, again, the threat of new entrants coming into the market if firms try to, basically exploit their monopoly power and make profits. All right, now we are moving on to Chapter 10 finally. Game theory inside oligopoly. So for those of you that haven't been keeping up with stuff, again, like I did cover everything we covered in this chapter in very fine detail in 2 other lectures. So make sure you go back and cover that stuff and really understand what I just covered in this chapter, because obviously you can see it's not intuitive and it's very specific. So you need to, put in a good amount of time to really understand it and be able to differentiate one result from another. It's not rocket science in any sense, so it's totally within your grasp, but it takes time to get it, so make sure you spend that time. All right, so now we're going to look at game theory. So let's do a quick overview of games and strategic thinking. So game theory is a general framework to aid in decision making when your payoff depends on the actions taken by other players. So it's an approach. It's a modeling approach, and it's not specific to economics. It was developed over time by mathematicians. Some economists sort of helped out a bit there, but there are applications in other disciplines like biology. You can use game theory in biology and some other sciences. So you would see game theory pop up in different contexts. The approach is by no means as simple as we set it up here. It's more complicated. Because again, the world is more complicated, and so the simple examples we look at here are just kind of meant to introduce you to, just the basic workings of this approach. And if you ever do wind up going further in economics, or any type of science that uses game theory, you will see a more complicated version of it, and so you should be prepared for that. It involves incorporating probabilities, which we'll kind of do here, but not too much, and a few other mathematical approaches to try to kind of figure out the best results from these situations that are characterized by a lot of uncertainty due to the interdependence. So in the games that we can call these situations where people are engaging in decision-making that's based on other people's decision-making as well. The players are individuals who make decisions. So in the games that we look at, the players are the managers of firms, making decisions about either pricing or output or a few other things. We look at different applications. I think we'll look at, I don't know if we'll go, yeah, we will go through a few of them today. So in an oligopolistic market consisting of two firms, each of which must make a pricing decision, like in the Bertrand setting, the firm's managers are going to be the players. The planned decisions of the players are their strategy. So should I charge a high price or a low price? Those are different possible strategies in a pricing game. The payoffs to the players are the profits or the losses that result from the strategies. And due to interdependence, the payoff to a player depends not only on that player's strategy, but also on the strategies employed by other players. All right, so in the analysis of games, the order in which players make decisions is important. So again, they can either make the decisions at the same time or they make the decisions sequentially. One player makes the decision first, other players decide in response to that, and then they go back and forth. So again, you have that timing aspect that can change the outcome, like we saw with the Cournot and the Stackelberg settings. So in a simultaneous move game, each player makes decisions without knowledge of the other player's decisions. So we could call the Cournot oligopoly setting a simultaneous move game, and we could model it that way. In a sequential move game, one player makes a move after observing the other player's move. So again, the Stackelberg setting could be considered a sequential move game where the leader makes their output decision first, and then the followers react to that. It's also important to distinguish between games played one time versus played repeatedly. So you might have a simultaneous move game that happens once. So the firms are meeting in the market one time, they're setting prices once, and that's it. You know, like the whatever it is they're selling, it's a one-time situation. Versus so that's called a one-shot game. The underlying game is played only once versus a repeated game. The underlying game is played more than once, where let's say firms are engaging in pricing competitions, games, continuously. But of course, the knowledge of when the game will end will also change the outcome of those kind of situations. So if the firms are playing repeated games and they don't know when the game is going to end, then that's going to be a different situation than if they do know when the game will end. And we'll talk about why that is when we get to the examples. So suppose very generally you have two gasoline stations that maybe they're on the same block, and neither firm has a location advantage over the other. Consumers view the gasoline at each station as perfect substitutes. So regardless of what different ingredients they might place, the gas is gas to people, and they're just going to buy whichever one's cheaper. The first thing in the morning, the manager of a gas station must phone the attendant to tell him what price to put on the sign. So it's the managers of these gas stations are engaged in a pricing game. It's a repeated game, but it's a one-shot game because both of them are setting their prices at the same time. They don't know what their rivals are going to set, but they do that every morning, so it's repeated. It's a one-shot repeated game. All right, since she must do this without knowledge of the rival's price, this pricing game is a simultaneous move game. This type of game is called the Bertrand duopoly game. So again, they're setting prices, and so they could wind up in that Bertrand trap where one sets a price, the other sets a lower price, and they just keep out pricing each other until they eventually price each other down to their marginal cost. That could happen. So given the structure of the game, if the manager of station A calls in a higher price than the manager of station B, consumers will not buy gas from station A. The manager of station A, therefore, is likely to reason, I think I'll charge $9.50 per gallon, which is less than what B is charging. But if B thinks, but then, of course, the manager of station A thinks, but if B thinks that I will charge $9.50, they're going to charge $9.49, so I better charge $9.48. And then the manager continues thinking, but if manager B thinks if manager B thinks that I think she'll charge $9.49, then she'll try to trick me by charging $9.47 because she knows that I'm going to charge $9.48. So I better charge $9.46. But if she thinks that I think she thinks, etc., etc., etc. So this is like the sort of reasoning that could result in these type of situations. game theory is a powerful tool for analyzing situations as these so that people don't wind up in these kind of weird situations where they're constantly trying to outthink themselves and their rivals at the same time. The same kind of thing that you probably try to do when you're trying to figure out what I'm going to put on the exam. Well, he might put this on the exam. Oh, wait, no, he thinks that I'm thinking that he's going to put this on the exam, so he won't put this in the exam, and then you just kind of wind up losing. But if you set it up as a game, you may actually win. All right, so let's start looking at the games, and then we'll take a break in a bit, about 10 minutes. So let's look at simultaneous move one-shot games. Again, the players are making their decisions at the same time, and the game is only being played once. All right, so a strategy is a decision rule that describes the actions a player will take at each decision point. So again, your strategy could be a high price, my strategy could be a low price, or we can switch. So we can represent a one-shot simultaneous move game as a table, which we call the normal form of a game. So representing a game like a table, like you see here, is the normal form representation of the game. So when we look at sequential move games, we use what's called the extensive form of the game, in which there are like decision nodes, and then there's like a tree because one participant makes a decision first, and then the rival can do either of a couple of things in response to that. So it's kind of a tree made of decisions, and it kind of well, I mean, ultimately does have a completely different nature than what you see here, and so that is called the extensive form of the game. So that's why it's important to kind of just be able to differentiate the two kind of types of games that we could set up a situation as, with this one being the normal form, the table. So a normal form game representation of a game indicates the players in the game, the possible strategies of each player, and the payoffs to the players that will result from alternative strategies. So in this example, there's two players. We have player A and player B. So generally in the column, we'll have player 1. So player A is player 1, and then in the row, we'll have player 2. So this is player B is player 2. The players can be any two entities that are engaged in a situation of strategic interaction. Player A has two possible strategies. Player A can either play up or down, so they can maybe charge a high price or a low price. We can think of them as prices. The possible strategies for player B are represented here. So player B can either play left or right. The payoffs of the two players are given by the entries in each cell. So each cell has two numbers in them. The first number corresponds to player A's payoff, and the second number corresponds to player B's payoff. So if player A plays up and player B plays left, then player A gets 10 and player B gets 20 in profit. And then, of course, the second number represents the payoff to player B, as I mentioned. An important thing to notice is that the payoffs to player A crucially depend on the strategy that B chooses, because player A could choose down, and if they choose down and player B chooses left, then player A will get negative 10. But like, you know, if player B were to choose right, then player A would wind up with 10 versus losing 10. So again, the payoff depends not just on what you do, but on what your rival does as well. So that's how it captures that interdependence of decision making. Similarly, if player A's strategy is up while player B's strategy is right, then player A's payoff will be 15 and player B's strategy payoff will be 8. All right, since the game is in a simultaneous move one-shot game, then the players get to make one and only one move, and they make their decisions at the same time. Also, the players cannot make conditional decisions. I'll choose up if player B chooses left, but if they choose right, I'll choose down. Like, they can't do that because they make decisions at the same time. What the optimal strategy should be for a player in this type of game can be a complex question. Depends on the nature of the game being played. One instance in which it's easy to characterize the optimal decision involves what's called a dominant strategy. So one way to kind of work one's way through the best possible outcome is to identify a dominant strategy for a player. A dominant strategy is a strategy that results in the highest payoff regardless of the action of the opponent. Basically, it is a strategy a person will choose regardless of what their rival does. And a person may or may not have a dominant strategy in the game. So we can identify here that player A has a dominant strategy. And how do we do that? Well, we take the perspective of player A, and then we have to consider what they would do. So if they were to choose up, they need to figure out, well, what's going to be my best payoff there? So if they were to choose up and player B were to choose left, then they would get 10 units and player B would get 20 units. But let's say player B played left and player A chose to choose down instead, then player A would actually wind up losing 10 units and player B would wind up gaining 7 units. So in response to player B playing left, what would player A want to do? Play up or down? Play up, right? Because up would get them $10 of profit or whatever, let's call it $10 million in profit, versus losing $10 million in profit there. So they would choose up if player B were to choose left. If player B were to choose right, then player A could either choose up or down. If they were to choose up, then if they were to choose down, then they would get 10 units. But if they were to choose up, they would choose 15 units. They would get 15 units. So obviously 15 is better than 10. So if player B chooses right, player A is going to choose up no matter what. So what we've identified is that no matter what player B does, regardless of whether player B chooses left or right, player A knows that it is optimal for her to always choose to play up. And therefore, player A has a dominant strategy, and that is to play up. And that is how you identify a dominant strategy. You take the perspective of a player and then consider what they would do in response to each of their opponent's possible strategies. If they choose the same thing in response to each of their opponent's strategies, then they have a dominant strategy. And if they choose different things, like if player A were to choose up in response to player B choosing left and choose down in response to player B choosing right, then they don't have a dominant strategy. They would do different things depending on what their opponent would do. All right, so player A's dominant strategy is to play up. So that gets us to a quick principle. Play your dominant strategy. Check to see if you have a dominant strategy. If you have one, play it. Quick demonstration problem. In the game we've been analyzing, the question is, does player B have a dominant strategy? Well, once again, we take the perspective of player B and figure out what they would do in response to each of player A's possible strategies. If player A were to choose up, what would player B choose? Left, right? Because 20 is greater than 8. In response to player A choosing down, what would player B choose? Say it again. We choose right, right? Because 10 is greater than 7. So does player B have a dominant strategy? No, player B does not have a dominant strategy. They're going to choose different things in response to what player A does. As opposed to player A did have a dominant strategy. They're going to choose up no matter what player B does. So they have a dominant strategy to play up. So, all right. Let's just call it a break, and we'll come back. Let's come back at 8:30.